Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm pleased to introduce Myles Millard. Myles is a director with Hines in Toronto and is involved in acquisitions, dispositions, asset management, and development. Myles is the lead on the T3 Bayside development, which is comprised of two 10-storey mass timber office buildings in the Queens Quay area of Toronto. Myles has over 10 years of industry experience and is well versed in many of the major asset classes, and has underwritten and executed transactions in various markets, including Canada, the US, Brazil, Turkey, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. Myles' completed transactions to date total over $3.6 billion in aggregate value. Myles is a CFA charter holder and has a Bachelor of Commerce from UBC. Myles, a big welcome to you and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleased to be here. I appreciate the invite.
Okay, Myles, so before we get into hearing about your current role and your work on the exciting T3 project, perhaps you can tell us why you decided to pursue a career in real estate in the first place and how you got started in the industry.
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of a combination of where my skill set lies and some passions. So growing up, I was always interested in architecture, always wanted to be an architect. And around the time when Google SketchUp came out, I downloaded it, big grand dreams of becoming an architect, and quickly realized I was absolutely horrendous at architecture and had zero kind of creativity or skill. So it was kind of the needing to pivot from there. And I'd always been interested in finance, and I always thought I was kind of decently good at it. So it felt like real estate development and investing would be a good way to kind of marry the two. And I was lucky enough to get my first job at TD on their commercial lending group as a summer associate. And, it was quickly realized from there that I didn't want to be in lending the whole time. I wanted to be on the principal side. I wanted to get the opportunity to execute and kind of source the developments. And then kind of went back to school with that in mind and was lucky enough to start at Concert Properties on their investments team, where we acquired the land and the income producing assets. So it was a great start to the industry and learning more about kind of what I wanted to do.
So after graduating from UBC and working in Vancouver for Concert Properties, it must have been a hard decision to leave the ocean, mountains, and rainforest to move to the lakeshore of Toronto. So what was behind that move for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Calgary, and so the mountains were always a huge part of my life. So it made it that much more difficult moving to a place that really has kind of no exposure to the mountains, being Toronto. But I was really kind of, at that point in my career, I was really focused on the investment side of the industry. And in particular, I really wanted to do kind of a combination of investing in property level and platform level investing, and hopefully kind of with an international tilt. So yeah, that really kind of forced me to look at Toronto, where the pension funds are, the kind of the major investment managers, or to kind of look to the States. And it felt like Toronto was the best fit at that point.
I mentioned in your introduction that you've worked on transactions in a number of different geographies, including Turkey and in South America. I'm assuming this was in your role as an investments associate with Cadillac Fairview in Toronto. Not everyone who works in real estate gets to research and underwrite deals in all corners of the globe. So can you explain the logic and strategy here for the company and the extent to which you were involved in those deals?
Yeah, so the strategy has a number of different kind of theses to it, where part of it really comes down from the fact that Cadillac was owned by, or still is owned by, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. And so you really get to piggyback off their kind of extensive resources and knowledge of these international markets. Teachers has always been kind of an early adopter of these emerging markets investing. And so they pushed that down to Cadillac. And when Cadillac looked at it and said, what is the pricing level in a market like Canada or the USA, where it feels like it's kind of fully baked with fairly limited upside. And then you go and look in, a country like Brazil, growing rapidly, expanding middle class, and you look at kind of both the pricing and the competition. And it felt like there was kind of a value play that you can come in, buy assets for cheaper, build platforms, and kind of really kind of grow these asset managers throughout the world of real estate properties. And so an example is in Brazil, Cadillac invested in a mall operator similar to almost a Cadillac Fairview of Brazil. They came in, it was owned by kind of the old gentleman who started it. They took a large stake and ended up taking it public, and still own a sizable piece of that and kind of help guide where that growth is. And so really we were trying to recreate that kind of throughout Latin America, which was a market that we really liked. And at one point we looked at Turkey as well because it shared some of kind of the same aspects where, you had the growing middle class, which really played to the retail asset class that we were interested in at the time. And kind of, it didn't end up working out in Turkey, but we spent a lot of time kind of looking at a platform there as well.
That's a really interesting and neat experience, I'm sure. So what strikes me about your career so far is the diversity you've experienced in terms of the nature of the roles you've held, the asset classes, and the geographies you've covered. I'm curious, did you plan for things to evolve like this? How did it turn out this way for you?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination really of kind of an endless curiosity for all aspects of real estate. I think I would consider myself, and I think people around me would probably laugh and say this is an understatement, but a real estate nerd kind of through and through, where all the areas fascinate me. I've always wanted to kind of, whether it's leasing, whether it's development, whether it's acquisitions, understand how kind of the full cycle works and really understand the industry as best as possible. And then kind of from there, I also was fairly conscious of really trying to build that broad skill set. And so spent a majority of kind of the beginning half of my career really focused on acquisitions, building out the kind of the technical underwriting skills, learning how to transact in real estate, and building kind of that side of the industry. And then decided to move over to the development side and build out the development skill set for kind of two reasons, where the first just being the development kind of skill set on its own, but also when I was at Cadillac, a lot of the investing we did was portfolio investing or investing in companies that owned real estate. So really kind of taking a high level approach and not kind of drilling down into the nitty gritty of the assets as much as kind of you're forced to do on the development side. So it was really helpful kind of going over to the development side, really understanding, when a tenant comes into lease space in an office building, what actually happens, what do they need, what do they demand, and how does this all actually take place? Whereas on the investment side, we didn't get that as much. So really kind of consciously trying to grow that knowledge as well.
And it sounds like you've got this enviable position and pretty awesome role at Hines because you're involved in such a broad range and scope of duties. Is that fairly typical of how things work at Hines?
Yeah, it's really one of the really attractive parts of Hines, where we really hire kind of broad generalists, and what we do is we don't have the typical verticals that another developer or investor or manager might have, being the kind of the development roles, the investment roles, and the asset managers. And so when we hire an associate, they can kind of expect to be dropped into any of those. And really kind of, it depends on which market you're hired into. Some might be more development focused, some might be more acquisitions focused. But really kind of, they try to get you exposure to all of the different areas. And as you progress through your career, you can start to kind of bias towards both kind of your interest and what your skill set lies in. But we really do kind of start with that base kind of broad level. And it's really one of the exciting areas for me and why I was so excited to come over, where, I spend the majority of my day working on a development in downtown Toronto, but I might we call it flipping to your night job of trying to kind of source an investment. And so it might be, I spend a lot of time looking at suburban office, but very different asset classes and very kind of different projects, going and buying an income producing building versus kind of your day job being an office developer. So that's one of the areas that really excited me and why I was so happy to come over.
I'd really like to learn more about the culture at Hines, but before perhaps you speak to that, I wanted to take a moment to touch on the news that Gerald Hines, the company's founder, unfortunately passed away this week at the age of 95. I read the tribute shared by Hines online and watched the accompanying short film. It's well worth checking out for anyone unfamiliar with the Hines story. He was a truly incredible man and was hugely respected around the world. So Mr. Hines trained as a mechanical engineer and had a strong grasp of construction techniques and was a pioneer in sustainability initiatives. He had a passion for design and helped transform the look and feel of high-rise buildings by partnering with famous architects like Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, Arthur Gensler, and Cesar Pili, so many others. He was a big supporter of various philanthropic causes, and the University of Houston's School of Architecture has borne his name for over 20 years. So, Myles, what did you come to learn about Mr. Hines, and how do you think he has shaped the culture at the company as you know it?
Yeah, I think to me, I was very fortunate in that I joined Hines kind of just over 4 years ago. And at the time, Mr. Hines, well, right up until he passed, he was quite active in the company. And so, he would fly up to the office, he would visit new buildings. He was extremely passionate about what he did. And so the opportunity to kind of meet him a number of times and just to kind of see his energy and his passion that, at well into his 90s just never seemed to fade away. Truly was one of those kind of generational leaders. And so I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying about being kind of a true real estate nerd, where when I met him the first time, it was like this remarkable kind of celebrity sighting. This is someone I'd looked up to since I really got started in real estate and even started thinking about real estate, and someone who I would argue probably has had more impact on kind of cities, especially on a positive side, than nearly anyone in the world, just given kind of how much he's done and what kind of his vision for real estate development has been. I think you and I were talking the other day, and I was mentioning a story where everything we do kind of comes down to thinking about how Mr. Hines would view it, and kind of thinking about, you have kind of this approval to go forward and make these decisions that are designed based, that are really kind of to build a better building, that aren't kind of on paper maybe justifiable from returns, but really kind of just having this true belief that building a better building is better business. And so we've always said kind of our Hines standard is the market plus one, meaning we're always trying to beat the market and always trying to build the best building in every market. And so just kind of seeing that passion that he brought and having kind of that allow us to carry through and make these decisions to try to build these really kind of special buildings has been an amazing experience. I think the one final thing too is that it's interesting where, everyone knows Mr. Hines for kind of the developments and kind of his impact on cities. But what they don't kind of probably think of on a day-to-day basis is how he shaped this culture of Hines, and really kind of his vision for creating an organization was really incredible. And just like the way he structured it, the way he kind of pushed power down to the regions and really kind of created this international, very large organization, but really one that's extremely decentralized, where the local regions make kind of very quick decisions. They're able to act kind of in the best interest of that region, and really kind of specialize in their own markets. It's really kind of fascinating to see.
I was reading through some of the comments that people had made in response to the tribute post. It's really amazing to see the global reach of this man and the level in which people seem to connect with him and genuinely respect and admire him from all over the world. It was truly quite something.
Yeah, it was his 95th birthday about a week and a half ago, and on our company intraweb website, it was pretty cool to see all of the comments. And these aren't just people, trying to get promotions and stuff by saying something nice. It's really kind of from the odd kind of property service people all the way up to the most senior people of the company, writing about kind of how he'd impacted them and how they appreciate kind of what he had built as an organization and how he'd empowered them. So even kind of having that right before he passed away was really kind of an amazing thing to see.
The values that we embody at Highview Partners are integral to everything we do. Be the best, do what's right, force for good, and enjoy the journey guide every step of our process and influence our actions and behaviours. This podcast was inspired by the value enjoy the journey, which includes building meaningful relationships within our professional community and giving back to an industry that we care deeply about.
So if we could talk about the T3 project that you're the lead on right now, I understand that it will be the tallest wood frame building in Toronto upon completion. I read about the groundbreaking event for this project in late July, which was fairly muted given the restrictions, but the event was live streamed and featured a variety of stakeholders, including all three levels of government and Waterfront Toronto. For anyone that's not familiar with the area of the city where this project is being built, what can you tell us about the background and significance of the site?
Yeah, and just kind of one additional comment is we think, and there's not really kind of a collective database on this or anything, but from what we understand, this will actually be the tallest in the world potentially for a new mass timber office. So super exciting. But thinking kind of to the significance of the site or just talking about kind of the waterfront Toronto area, I think as someone who came from a city that valued being Vancouver, that valued the waterfront, where really it is the most expensive real estate, when I moved to Toronto, I hadn't really been here before, so I ended up moving down to the waterfront because I was so excited that I could afford to rent on the waterfront, and quickly learned that the waterfront is where you didn't want to be in Toronto. And it was cold in the winter. It's barren. It's really kind of been forgotten about. It's separated by a highway, and that was really the waterfront of the past. I think Waterfront Toronto was created and has done an exceptional job of really kind of dealing with the fact you do have this Gardiner Expressway that kind of cuts the north of the expressway from the south, but really kind of still going past that, creating some phenomenal art installations, an unbelievable public realm, and really kind of focusing on really the east side of Yonge where it is kind of undeveloped. And so you've seen the first round of developments that have been incredible and have started to drive kind of this attention back to the waterfront, where I truly believe that, it's going to be one of the most, if not the most exciting areas of the city. You're seeing some really special office buildings go up there, this new residential area. There's schools down there. There's community hubs, public art, and it's all tied together with some amazing public spaces. And so we were lucky enough to win an RFP to develop a 13-acre site down there that we've called Bayside back in 2010. And really it was our kind of thesis, it was before I joined Hines, but was this is similar to kind of my experience in moving here, where, we were in cities around the world and you see how much they value their waterfront, and it just didn't feel like it was valued here. And so we were all over it, and we're lucky enough to kind of be selected. Our development is going to be about 2 million square feet when it's built out. It's made up of 4 condo buildings, 2 office buildings. Then there's another kind of mixed tenure, affordable and market building that'll kind of follow behind that. And so we're done the first 2 condo buildings. We just topped off the third, and we're about to launch the 4th construction. And then the office building launched about a month ago as well. And so when a lot of people kind of have this idea of the Toronto waterfront of the past in their head, and so they don't get down there as much, but I would encourage everyone to get down there and see it, because it's really remarkable how nice it is now. And as you start to see these additional kind of developments pop up and the tenants that have signed on to be them, I think it'll just continue to be more and more kind of an attractive area, especially when you consider how it feeds into the Portland. So if you think about Union Station and then you follow along the waterfront and then wrap around to the Portland's development, I think that whole node will really be this hub of innovation. So we're excited to be kind of a fairly big part of that.
So what makes the T3 project so special in your opinion?
Yeah, T3 is a product type that we have. So we've done a couple of them. The first one being Minneapolis and the second one in Atlanta. And in T3 Bayside's case, the 3 T's stand for timber, talent, and technology. But really where this came from is we manage properties around the world, and we started to see, as you see kind of the proliferation of the tech industry and the creative class, you started to see these tenants, in every market you're in, they started to kind of gravitate towards the cool brick and beam old office buildings with the brick walls and the exposed ceilings. But we're in the property management business. We understand those buildings are cold in the winter, they're hot in the summer. You spill coffee on the floor and it drips down on the people below you. There's no parking. The floor plate's awkward. And so really we sat about and said, well, what can we do to create a modern product of this? One that it takes kind of a class AA office building, brand new, but also merges it with that kind of brick and beam, that authenticity that these tenants really want, that really expresses kind of their brands. And so through that, this heavy timber product type came about. And kind of one of the kind of amazing areas of it is just the sustainability story, where it's wrapped in timber, or it's built out of timber, and you just being a renewable resource, the benefits are incredible. Where, on T3 Bayside alone, the stat that we love is that by using timber rather than steel and concrete, we eliminate the equivalent of 2,700 cars off the road. And so they really are these real stats. They're not kind of, pie in the sky and stuff. And so that it's really kind of quantifiable difference, which is really amazing.
And what's your specific involvement in the project?
Yeah, so I'm partnered with a construction team. And so the rough kind of breakdown of how we separate the project or kind of allocate tasks is they handle anything that is kind of physically building the project. And then I do kind of call it, quote unquote, the business side of things. So the leasing, marketing, the capitalization, whether it's the equity or the debt. At the end, this is a merchant build, so we will sell it on the end. So I'll oversee the sale. And then we work together on kind of the plans as, they think through the plans as kind of from a buildability standpoint and kind of a construction standpoint. I think them through kind of from a leasing and kind of end user standpoint. And so we collaborate there to kind of make sure that we have the best building kind of at the end of the day, with two sets on that. But really kind of my function would be kind of call it finance, marketing, and capitalization.
What do you think are the benefits of having this structure and working in this way?
One of the things that we love is that we're kind of soup to nuts developers. And so when you buy a project or kind of acquire a new piece of land, you see it through from the start to the finish. You don't have investments buy you the land and they give it to you and you go and build kind of what you think's best. And then you give it back to investments and they sell the building. You really kind of are responsible for it from end to end. So you have to go find the equity, you have to find the debt, you have to build it and kind of guide it to the vision that you think is kind of the right vision for the site. And so at the end of the day, the way I always describe it is if you want to just develop and execute on development all day, it's probably not the right structure for you. But if you really want to feel like you owned a project and you got to kind of create what that is, it's a great kind of opportunity to really kind of have that, almost that feeling of being kind of a private developer where you go and do it all yourself, but kind of having the resources of a large organization behind you.
It really does sound like the perfect role. And especially for self-confessed real estate nerds such as yourself, the fact that you're involved with a lot of the fun aspects of the project. So switching gears a little away from T3, what do you think are the main reasons that you've been able to achieve the success you have in the business so far?
I think for me, I've been really fortunate. Maybe it was cognizant on my side, or maybe it was just lucky, where I've always worked kind of in both organizations and with groups that they cared a lot and they had kind of really high standards. So I've always worked really kind of very closely for bosses and for kind of managers that I would kind of argue are exceptional, very kind of talented. I think Andrew Tong was on here recently. And so kind of that was the first kind of manager I had to start off my career. And I've kind of continued that spate of having these managers that care about your growth and really kind of care about kind of elevating their entire team, but also kind of the company within the industry. And so I've always tried the like classic idea of surrounding yourself by smart people and really kind of milking all the knowledge you can out of them to kind of make it as best of a learning opportunity as you can. And I think that's paid off super well.
What would you say is the most enjoyable part of your job?
I think to keep it short, because I could go on forever. Really kind of, it's summarized very simply is the people and the projects. That's really at the end of the day, what gets me excited. We don't do a lot of commodity work here. And so we build kind of projects that are super exciting. They're generally cutting edge in terms of technology, in terms of design. And we get to work with, whether it's internal or externally, some of the kind of, I would argue, smartest people in the industry. And so we work with kind of always kind of the trend-setting architects, the kind of leading consultants. And then I've always been attracted to just the Hines team as a general, where I find they're super passionate and they're super kind of energetic in their work.
On the flip side then, what about the most challenging aspects of your role? What would you say they are?
We operate quite lean, I think is well known in the company, which is really good in certain respects, but can be challenging in others. So, you wear, as we were just kind of saying, you wear a lot of different hats in your roles, which can really force you to quickly have to learn kind of different areas of the industry that you might not have done before. And even within the organization, some people might not have experience where I found kind of in some of the large organizations I've been in the past where you have kind of these specialist roles, there's always someone you can go to answer that question, whereas sometimes there isn't. I find for us, just given the lean structure and kind of the broad kind of role. And so having to go find those answers isn't always the easiest. It's great for your learning when it's done, but at the time it can be a lot of work and kind of distract you from your day-to-day job.
So Myles, you're a CFA charter holder. I sometimes get asked about what the benefits of embarking on this designation are. How helpful has it been for your career so far? And what advice would you have for anyone considering what additional education or qualifications might be worth investing in?
I think for CFA, it's really tough. I get asked this a lot, and there's not a short answer to it where I would say on a day-to-day basis, my CFA training almost never plays in, but you would kind of take that and say, okay, so don't do it. But I think there's a couple parts to it that I've really liked about the CFA program. One, it's just very cost effective. And so to the extent kind of cost is what's prohibiting you from kind of furthering your learning, it's quite reasonable. You get to work while you're doing it, and it's a couple $1,000s each level probably. But two, I think it forces you to think a different way, really, and kind of bring it more of an analytical kind of focus to your thinking. And so I always did find that while I don't use probably a lot of the technical skills, the way it ingrains thinking, I do think I utilize on a daily basis. And then finally, I would say something we always joked about at Cadillac, because we were kind of big supporters of the CFA program, was that no one's mom or dad gets them into the program, and no one's mom or dad gets them out. So at the end of the day, someone wrote all 3 tests and presumably passed or found some other way, or so it's kind of this nice thing where it's at least a level playing field where you don't look around and say, well, same last name as so and so. I wonder if she got into the program. I do think, kind of in thinking about kind of broader learning, at Hines, we are big supporters of MBA programs. I think we generally don't hire a lot of kind of out of school graduates, especially in the region I'm in, we're kind of too lean to provide the proper training support to them. And so we would rather hire them either out of MBAs or with industry experience. So I think it's never a bad idea to consider an MBA, but I think you just have to think about kind of what's your opportunity cost, what's your kind of current growth trajectory, what's the ultimate goal. I think it's a very kind of big, much larger conversation than just kind of thinking about, will these 3 letters advance my career? Because you kind of have to think very holistically and kind of look at all of the options on the table, and also look at realistically where your career is headed.
I think that's great advice. An interesting perspective for anyone contemplating the CFA designation. So what general advice would you have for anyone starting out in the industry?
To me, the big one is, one of the reasons I love real estate so much is I find the people in real estate are extremely passionate. And so I find almost everyone that I meet on a daily basis really wants to be in this. They didn't kind of fall backwards and do it and are limping through it and kind of miserably. And so, they want to learn more. And I think you have to really leverage that. So I think passion is critical. And I think people want to hire people that are passionate. And I think you have to advance that further by saying, a lot of people might argue, go become the best analyst in the world. But I think it's poor advice. I think what you really want to be, because if your differentiator is your technical skills, I don't know if that's really a sustainable way to kind of advance a career a long term. Whereas if you go and say, I'm going to know more about real estate than anyone, and really kind of, obviously that's a very lofty goal, but kind of in just trying to take that kind of mindset and say, when my boss comes to me and says, we're thinking about buying this building, I already know that such and such player bought the building 2 doors down, or sold it, or someone dropped it. And just kind of understanding whether it's the trends, whether it's the players, understanding the market, and just through kind of consuming information, whether it's going to events, listening to speakers, reading articles, reading books, meeting people, grabbing coffees. I think making your competitive advantage be your knowledge of the industry and your relations within the industry, I think is an extremely kind of strong way to push your career forward.
That's great advice as well. Thanks, Myles. Okay, so getting to know you a little bit more now then. What are your passions outside of work that perhaps people in the industry may not know about you?
I grew up competing in halfpipe and snowboarding. And so while I live in Toronto, snowboarding has kind of always been a hugely important part of my life. And I don't get out nearly as much as I would like to, and try to get west at least once a year and get into the mountains. But I would say that's kind of one area that people might not know about me or might be surprised.
That's cool. I was actually reading about how Mr. Hines was a big skier and spent lots of time in Colorado, I think it was.
Yeah. So when I joined, I think he had just turned 90, and I think he skied 30 days that year. So it really kind of, and then I think his wife cut him off after that year. I think it really gives you kind of a signal into just the endless energy that he had. And Aspen, he developed kind of an area of Aspen and had a home there. And that was, I think, one of his kind of favorite places to visit, from what I understand. That's
a great story. Yeah. I wonder whether your snowboarding skills helped move your resume along on the hiring process. Okay, we'll wrap up as we do. And I have 5 quick fire questions for you. So number 1, what's one book that you have read that you find yourself recommending most often?
I'm going to cheat a little bit and give 3 because I have a really hard time with this question. So I would say the first one is a book called Factfulness. And it's really a book about kind of the world's actually a lot better than it seems like when you read media headlines. And given everything that's going on right now, it's important to kind of think critically about that. And it's a little bit of a refreshing take. I think the other one is a book for real estate kind of nerds out there called Other People's Money, about the Tishman Speyer acquisition of Stuytown in New York, and really kind of just shows the exuberance of where real estate can go during a bubble. Really fascinating book and really well written. And then the final one would just be kind of a fun read, is called The Fish That Swallowed the Whale. And it's about kind of all things, the history of the banana industry in the US. And it's got some colorful characters, some civil war in Latin America. And it's just a pretty wild story of industry that I never knew. And so it's kind of a refreshing kind of separation from real estate and anything related to anything else I do.
Interesting recommendations. I'll make sure to mention those in the show notes. Question number 2, what recent purchase up to $100 has changed your life?
I don't want this to be a recurring theme, but I'm going to cheat on this one as well, where I have to say AirPods. Given work from home, they have been critical. So it's a little bit more than $100, but I think when I think about things that have changed the last couple of months of my life, that they're probably up there, one of the highest.
Number 3, what's your favorite Toronto restaurant?
Yeah, favorite Toronto restaurant, I think without a doubt would be a restaurant called Jewel's Bistro. They have very large chunks of meat. It's very French style. You get kind of a meat board to share between 2 people. It's reasonably priced, really cool atmosphere, kind of modestly priced wine list, and just an all-around great kind of night out there.
Number 4, what's the best live sporting event that you've witnessed?
I was lucky enough to be at the Jose Bautista bat flip game. And so I don't think I'll probably ever witness energy like that after that took place. So I still have the ticket stub. It's one of those things I'll hold on to.
And finally, number 5, your celebrity lookalike.
The closest one I get is James Van Der Beek.
Okay.
That's a good thing or a bad thing, but
no comment.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Myles, listen, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. That was awesome and super helpful comments.
No, it was great being on here. Love chatting. So always happy to chat about this.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.